I'm the Heavenly Stars, and we're going to be reading a story, but first we're going to be reading a and then we are not doing a synopsis today, so. And then we're going to be reading
a new book.
A new book, so I don't get to announce that my dad gets to, so I'm happy about that. Let's go straight into Bible time.
Hello, welcome one and all. I am David, also known as Heavy D, and I'm going to be telling a story. So first we're going to be reading from the book of Ecclesiastes today. If you have trouble finding that, it is after Proverbs and after the page after Proverbs, and then you will come to Ecclesiastes. And you can follow along. I'm reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible. So let me go ahead and get started with the book of Ecclesiastes. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full to the place where the streams flow. There they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. That is the end of Ecclesiastes chapter 1. So we will continue that in the future, but first we're going to announce the new book that we are about to begin. I'm not sure what's going on.
We are going to be reading. I'm going to be here.
Okay, we are going to be reading Hittite Warrior by Joanne Williamson. This is one of an old standby favorite from our family. You can see it's been read several times.
Yes.
I think Rebecca's read it and Ben has read it, and I'm not sure about... Kimberly says she's read it, and I know I've read it, so I don't think either of the boys have read it, so this will be a first time for them, and I don't think Mom's read it either, so this will be a first time for Mom, and if you haven't read it, then this can be a first time for you as well. So let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the prologue, which is called Introducing a Hittite, and I guess the child... The baby Yoda child behind me will be, I'm not going to speak that name that they pretended to call it in the last season, but he's going to be there behind me. Apparently, At least for today. All right, so...
Copyright.
Yeah, I know. Now this is going to get taken down because of copyright, not because of all the copywritten books that I've read. All right, so this is the prologue called Introducing a Hittite. As soon as everyone is settled, I'll go ahead and get started. There we go. All right. So, I, Uriah Tarhond, son of Arnadash, the horse breeder, am a Hittite. I was born of a race of men who came down from the unknown north 1,000 years ago and became the rulers of half the world. But that world has come to an end, and I can never go home again. I was born in the Hittite province of Arzawa. My father was a kinsman of the chief of the province and raised horses in the grasslands to draw the battle chariots for which our land of Great Hatti was framed. When I was a child, the world was as it had always been, or so I thought. We, the Hittites, lived in Great Hatti, with its rocky mountains, its plains, and its forests stretching to the Black Sea of the north and the Great Sea of the west. We ruled the northern world, and Egypt, the accursed land, ruled the world of the south. Other people did not matter. There were the lands of Canaan and the Amorites to the south, with their rich trading cities divided between us and Egypt. To the east, the lands of Huri and Mitanni sent us tribute, and sometimes traders from the great city of Babylon came to our towns and villages, but I never spoke to them. For the nobles of Great Hatti, whose ancestors came down from the northern wilderness 1,000 years ago, scorned all merchants and scribes and left such work to the dark-skinned ancient peoples of the land who had lived there since the world began. Our women, like my mother and my sister Anitis, were kept close at home to guard them from these people, and I myself was not allowed to speak even to the elders of the ancient village where we lived. It was so wherever our fair-skinned ancestors had settled and conquered, even, the storytellers said, in the far-off Hindus Valley. The world was as it had always been, and it was protected by the gods. We Hittites worshipped all the gods, some of them our own, brought with us from the unknown north, many of them the gods of the people with whom we traded or who sent us tribute. We worshipped them all, and we knew that they would always keep us safe and strong, but they did not. My story will tell of how they failed us, how disaster came upon us all, and how strangely I have survived it. It will tell of the rise and fall of nations, the fading of old glories, and the birth of new. And it will tell much of that little strip of land called Canaan to the south between us and the accursed land of Egypt, which was only a name to me when I was a child, for all the wealth and all the armies and all the glories of the nations have passed through that little land and probably always will, and the story of the kings of Canaan is the story of the world. That is the end of the prologue. Let me begin chapter 1. The Sea People. I begin my story with the day I was 13 years old, the day my father told me I must give up the great horse Labarnish. Labarnish was the best horse we ever bred. My father had brought the mare who gave him birth from a trader who had gotten her from the lands around the southern desert. The horses there are larger, more slender, and swifter than our small, stocky horses of the north, and Labarnish showed his greatness in his large, well-set-out eyes and longer ears, his sloping shoulders and round ribs, and his dark gold collar. He was to have been my horse, and I had named him with the titles of the old kings of Hatti, meaning Great One. I had been in the stable when his mother had first given him birth, and it was I who saw him stagger into his long, wobbly legs. My father had given me full charge of his training and promised that if I handled him well, he would give him to me for my own. So it was I who first haltered him, who first fed him grain, who cared for his hoofs, who combed his mane and tail and groomed him with my own fingers. And it was I who, a year after his birth, first harnessed him beside his mother to a light chariot and drove him out across the steppes. But now my father had broken his promise. He saw the wonder and reproach in my eyes as I stood before him, my hand on Labarnish's neck, and he tried to make me understand. "It is the 13th year of the reign of the king," he said, "and 13 is a holy number. All loyal vassals must offer tribute, the best they have to give, and Labarnish is our best. And Uriah, there is more." He drew me closer to him and spoke slowly, as if to give his words more weight. "I have kept these things from your mother and sister," he said to me, "but you are a man now, and may know the truth. There is trouble in the land of Hatti. Do you remember the stories of the rebel chief Matuwatus?" I shivered. Every child knew the stories that were told of Matuwatus. For many years there had been a shadow across our world. Out across the western sea lived the men we called the Sea People, whose great island was Crete, and whose great city was Mycenae, on the western mainland. They called themselves Achaeans. Their princes were sometimes sent to Hattusas, our great city, to learn the arts of chariots and horsemanship, and they had become jealous of our lands and power. In the years when my father was a child, a Hittite trader called Matuwatus had sold himself to Atreus, an Achaean chief, and had come raiding and burning into the province of Arzawa. Some of the old Arzawans who hated their Hittite masters had joined him, and a time of terror had come upon the land that had never been forgotten. But Matuwatus had been dead for many years, I said, and Atreus the Achaean must be a very old man. "Their spirit is still alive," said my father. "Rumors have come to us from the north of strange tribes from over the border who are bringing terror upon the people there, and even here in the south strange sights have been seen and strange stories are being told. There are those who say that such trouble is coming upon the land as has never been seen before, and that the hand of the king is not as strong upon the country as it has been before. He did not make the holy pilgrimage this year to lead the worship of the gods of the provinces." He stared before him a moment, then smiled and laid his hand on my shoulder. "You see why we must all prove our loyalty and our faith in this holy year." "I understand," I said at last, though my hand tightened on the mane of Labarnish. "Good," said my father. "Then tomorrow we will go to Habala and find a caravan to take us to Hattusas." "Hattusas!" I cried. "The great city?" "Yes," said my father, pleased that my spirits had been raised. "There will be a great pilgrimage and great celebrations. If our king will not come to us, we will go to him." And for a moment I almost forgot my grief over Labarnish in my excitement over the journey we were to make. For I had never been to Hattusas, or to any town except Habala, for the horse fairs. My father told the servants of our plans for the journey and gave strict orders for the guarding of our house and lands. He commanded all the men of the household to keep themselves well armed, for my mother and sister, being women, were to be left behind. "If I were an Egyptian woman, I would be all allowed to go," said my sister Anytus bitterly, and my mother frowned at the name of the accursed land. "Women in Egypt are as evil as the men," she said. My father watched them with troubled eyes, and once, during that last night before the journey, I thought he had changed his mind. Then he shook his head as if in anger. "I will not stay at home in fear in this holy year," he said, "because of rumors and old women's stories. There are people in Arzawa who have always hated the king of Hatti. It is they who are trying to spread fear among those of us who are loyal. Still, I could wish that Hattusas were nearer home." I was not worried. Nothing could happen to Mother and Anytus, I told my father. The gods will protect us all. And so we joined a caravan, my father and I, for the journey to the great city. It was a journey of many days through grasslands, hills, valleys, and later the rocky mountainous lands of the north. For Hattusas lay in its mountains like the nest of a giant bird. A robber's retreat, the Egyptians called it. My heart still beats faster as I remember the road that led to it marked. As we neared the city by giant images in stone, lions for the holy goddess of Arena, bulls for Teshub, god of thunder, god of the double axe. To reach the city we had to ford a great river which I did not like, for I was afraid of water. Will it be as big as Habala? I asked my father. Will there be a fair with jugglers and fire-eaters? I wish it were time for the winter festival. I would like to see that play of the god slaying the dragon again. My father laughed. Once you have seen Hattusas, he said, all others, even Habala, will be as mud villages in your eyes. And it was true. The first sight of the great rock-hewn wall of the city struck awe into my heart. The gateways and buildings of solid stone were such as I had never seen before, and I was so taken up with the great sights that I forgot that we must leave Labarnish in the stables of the king until the moment was upon us, and for the first time I realized that I would probably never see him again. If I had been alone, I would have thrown my arms around his proud neck and wept and kissed him, but I was not alone, and could only watch while they took him away, Labarnish, whom I had raised and come to love, and whom I had named Great One. When he had disappeared from sight, I turned to my father in a kind of amazement. I will never see him again, I cried. How can you be sure? Said my father. It is in the hands of the gods. But I was not comforted. For the first time in my life I had lost a thing I loved. That night they held the celebration in honor of the 13th year of the reign of the king. My father and I, being related to the great families of Hattusas, were allowed a place in the hall. I forgot my grief for a while in wonder at all I saw. All the loyal chiefs of great Hatti were there. Our own noble kinsman, the chief of Arzawa, in fashionable braided hair, pointed shoes, tall hat with upturned brim, earrings, and a cane. There were ambassadors from Egypt in pleated kilts and elaborately curled wigs. There was the Dardanian chief, Paris Alexandus, from distant Troy, whose grandfather had fought with us against the sacred Rameses of Egypt at the Battle of Kadesh. The young prince who would be the second Subiluima was with his father and king, and when they stood together on the great stone stairway, all shouted and clashed their wine cups. "Labarnish! Labarnish!" they cried, meaning Great One, and tears came to my eyes at the thought of my own Labarnish. But my father looked strange and grim, and many there must have known in their hearts that such a sight would never again be seen in Hattusas. For though we did not know it on that day, the glory of great Hatti was at an end. We did not stay long in the great city. Things had become strangely quiet in Hattusas. People spoke little, and my father said it was as if someone had muffled the sounds of the streets with a blanket. On the morning of our departure, a madman ran through the temple square, shouting, "Midas is coming! Midas is coming to destroy us all!" But 2 soldiers seized him and dragged him off. I suppose he was killed and hung up by the gates of the city, like other criminals that we had seen there. What was he saying? I asked my father. He spoke of Midas the Phrygian, he replied, a barbarian chief, one of the sea people. There are stories that he has come into the north with his tribe and is laying waste wherever he passes, but the king has forbidden it to be told for fear of frightening the people. Whether this is true or not, I give thanks that it is still far from Arzawa. As we passed from the city with the returning caravan, I looked back at the great walls. I am glad I stared at them so long and remembered them so well. for I never saw them again. It was on the road back into Arzawa that we saw it. From a valley some distance away, a strange smell reached us, and the sight of smoke curling into the air. The master of the caravan was a Babylonian, and interested only in the merchandise he was carrying toward the western sea. He would not stop or leave the road to see what the trouble was, or if there were any in need of help. "Uriah," said my father, "you and I are men of Arzawa, and cannot pass by when our brothers may be in distress." So we left the caravan and rode our sturdy little northern horses as fast as we could toward the strange thing in the valley. Though I have seen many terrible sights since then, I still remember that one. A village had been burned to the ground, along with the land around it. Many men lay dead and dying, and some women and children, though many of these had perhaps fled or been carried off. Only one man was left unharmed, sitting dazed and staring against the stone wall of the half-destroyed hut. "Who has done these things?" "This thing," cried my father, speaking to him as if he had been a brother, though he was only a serf of the ancient people of the land. "Madawatas," replied the man. I shuddered and drew closer to my father. "Madawatas is dead," said my father. "But he has come back," said the man, "and he has brought the sea people with him." "Surely he is mad, father," I whispered, shuddering again and trying to draw him away. But my father spoke gently to the man, and soon he began to sob and talk to him, telling him how a great line of ox carts had come into the valley, guarded by armed men in chariots, and carrying women and children and all manner of riches. "They came from the west," said the man, "and did not speak our language, so they are surely from the sea. The armed men fell upon us and killed us all, except some of our women and children that they took away to serve them. Why did they do it? Our village was not loyal to the king of Hatti." I knew father ought to kill the man at once for saying that, but was glad when he did not. "The sea people," said my father softly. "Atreus is old or dead, but his sons are mighty among the Achaeans. They have come into Arzawa as Midas the Phrygian has come into the north. Come, we will ride for home." We did not go back to the road or rejoin the caravan, but rode across the country with all speed till we came to our own acres, and found that we had come too late. Our village, too, had been burned, our home and our land destroyed, and our servants slain. My father said nothing at the sight, but threw himself from his horse and ran among the bodies and the smoking ruins, searching for some sign of my mother and my sister. I stayed on my horse, for I could not have moved, but then my father gave a great cry and fell on his knees, and I knew what he had found. I knew that I would never see my mother and my sister Anitas again, and that all the world as I had known it had been destroyed. This happened in my 14th year. They say that 4 years later Hattusas itself was destroyed. The armies came down from the north and the west and from the islands in the western sea, with giant shields and plumed helmets decorated with the tusks of boars. Wives and families followed in ox carts laden with all their possessions, precious iron ornaments and dainty gold and silver objects of the old style from Crete and Mycenae. None stood before them. No Dardanians from Troy came to our aid, for Troy had fought for its life and lost near the shores of the western sea. For 3 years after the destruction of our home, my father and I lived on in the ruins, making a bare living with our bees and what was left of our orchards and the food we could raise. We could not fight the enemy, for there were none to join us. Those who had not been slain by the sea people were either too terrified to stand against them, or did not care who were their masters, Achaeans or Hittite nobles. We lived as servants of the conquerors, who would come to us at any time and take what they wanted, and strike us down if we did not give it to them soon enough. One day, when I was 16, 2 men drove up in a chariot to where my father and I were gathering in fruit. One was a captain of the sea people, and the other was his servant and charioteer. You, said the captain to my father, as we had spoken to the serfs in the old days, all that you harvest is confiscated for our chief in Havilah. My driver will stay with you, and see that you don't shirk. My father stood for a moment with his head bowed. Then suddenly he straightened and stared into the eyes of the captain. No, he said, and for the first time in 3 years he seemed like my father again. The captain was a tall man with blue eyes and a dark brown beard. His driver was short and dark and powerful. The driver seized my father from behind and held him while the captain struck him across the face, shoulders, and chest with the butt end of his spear. The gods destroy you, you dogs! I shouted, and sprang upon the captain, but a blow from his spear sent me sprawling on the ground while he finished beating my father. I cried out in agony at every blow he received, but my father made no sound. Afterward the captain stood back and looked at us in disgust. They will do no work today, he said to his driver. Come, but he shouted at us over his shoulder. We will come back. My father lay on the ground where the driver had let him fall, and at first I thought he was dead. Then I heard him breathing with some difficulty, and I managed to get him into the house, though he cried out with pain at being lifted. I stayed with him through the day and through the night, but I soon knew that he would not live. He was too badly hurt, too many bones had been broken, and he was too weak and tired to fight against death. Don't die, I begged him. Everything is gone, not you too. But he shook his head. You must not stay here, he said at last. Promise me. Where can I go? I asked him. This is my home. Not now, he said. It is their home now. He was silent for a time, summoning his strength. You must go south, he said after a while. Where south, father? I asked softly, thinking that if he would keep talking he would not die. To the land of Canaan there is a town called Harosheth. There is a man there. What man, father? A man called Sisera. He will help you for my sake. But what is he to you, father? And how can I find him? Promise, said my father. And seeing that he could say no more, I gave my promise. He did not speak again, and I saw that he was really dying. I clung to him, trying to hold him back from death, but it was no use. He died. As the holy laws prescribed, I burned his body on a great pyre and mourned him for 13 days, though there was no old woman to come from the village and say the magic rites over his body, nor had I oil or a silver jar in which to lay his bones, nor beer or wine to quench his funeral fire. But no man was ever better mourned. And when the 13 days were up, I made my way to Havilah and prepared myself for the long journey into the land of Canaan. As JJ says, this is pretty dark, but that was chapter 1, and I think that it gets better, but there is actually a dark scene later on too. So I will warn you on that. But let's keep going. This is chapter 2, The Merchant from Tyre. Canaan was only a name to me, like its neighboring land of the Amorites. Not too long ago, as the years are counted, we of great Hatti conquered and possessed all those lands to the south, though Egypt had claimed them. And we and the accursed land had fought for them over the years till the battle of Kadesh, when the boundaries were finally settled. After that, we had ruled the northern lands of Canaan, while Egypt had ruled in the south below the town of Damascus, and there had been an uneasy peace between us. Harosheth, I knew, was in that part of Canaan ruled by Egypt, and I shuddered to think what might await me there, for all Hittites knew that only evil could come out of Egypt, and that all Egyptians were cruel and treacherous beyond belief. Besides, all Hittites knew that the Canaanites themselves were cowardly and dishonorable men who set lowly merchants above honest warriors, and who taught their children to read and keep accounts instead of fighting for what they wanted. But my father had said that I was to go to Harosheth, and I had given him my promise. I thought that I would never get to Canaan in any case, no matter what I had promised, for I had no money and little food to last me on the journey. I must travel on foot, for no horses or donkeys had been left to us at home. I found a caravan made up of traders from Canaan, who bowed and smiled at the new Achaean masters of Havilah, as they had smiled and bowed to my father before. But we Hittites were no longer their masters. Now they shouted at me and thrust me aside when I tried to speak to them, for I was shabby and poor and one of a conquered race, so I could not find out where in Canaan they were going. But I could not stay in Havilah, so I kept as close to the men of the caravan as I could, and as they left the town, followed in their shadow. I remember little of those first days of the journey. The road was hot, stony, and dusty, and it burned and bruised my feet. The sun grew stronger and crueler as we moved southward, so that I was often dizzy and always thirsty. There was water for all, but my small supply of food was growing smaller, and though I ate as little as I could, I knew that it would soon be gone, and that I would be left to die like a beggar. My thoughts often wandered, and sometimes it seemed that I had been walking along that highway all my life, though I could not tell where or why. It was on the fourth night that the robbers came down upon us. We had halted for the night at the caravanserai along the way. The merchants and their servants had crowded themselves into the dark, bare building that surrounded the courtyard, where their supplies and merchandise were loaded, but I stretched myself in the open, preferring the company of the animals and the stars. For if the Canaanite merchants held me in scorn, I returned the feeling with all the strength I had left. I lay on the ground in my threadbare robe, listening to the soft sounds made by the beasts, donkeys mostly, and goats brought along for their milk. There were no horses. The traders in this caravan rode on donkeys, or, if they were rich enough, in sedan chairs carried by servants. I thought with longing of the horses I had known at home. I remembered other nights when I had slept in the open with the young colts, with Labarnish. Labarnish, I whispered, where are you now? But I thought that he was probably dead. The moon was bright, but there were shadows all around me. If my ears had not been dulled by hunger and weakness, I would have heard the sound before me, but I did not hear it till the new shadow fell across me. I turned my head and looked up into a dirty brown-bearded face. It was twisted and ugly. At the same time that I saw it, I saw that a hand was raised above me, and that there was a knife in it. I rolled aside, and the knife came down on the spot where I had been an instant before. As the man sprawled in surprise, I gathered myself together and sprang upon him. I was sick from weariness and lack of food, and I would never have been so strong if all the rage of the past 3 years had not come upon me. I wanted to kill this strange man, because if I did not, I knew he would kill me, but also because the sea people had killed my mother and sister, destroyed my home, and beaten my father to death, and because the Canaanite merchants no longer bowed to me, but pushed me aside and treated me like a serf. So I fell upon him from behind, seized him by the wrists, and twisted his arms behind him till he screamed, and the knife fell from his hand. Then we both struggled for it on the ground, and I was the one who got it. He tried to force it from me, but he, being a robber, was probably not much stronger or better nourished than I was. And I was so full of hate that it served me better than a well-fed body. So I broke his grip, threw him to the ground, then fell upon him again, and plunged his own knife into him till he was dead. There had been wild men like this one at home, who would rob and kill when they could. So I knew that he was probably a lookout sent on ahead of his band to see if the men of the caravan were asleep, and to kill any guards. I knew the other bandits had probably heard his scream and would soon be down upon us, so when I saw that he was safely dead, I stood up and shouted to those inside the caravanserai. "Hey," I shouted, "you lazy fat ones in there, stand up if you can and pick up your weapons. Somebody else is after your silver." I made a lot of noise and shouted many many more unflattering things, enjoying myself for the first time in 3 years. The merchants had probably heard the scream of the robber, too, so they all came piling out, armed with their staves and their bronze and jeweled daggers. I burst out laughing at the sight of them. They came just in time, however, for, as I expected, the robber band now came pouring down, shrieking fearfully, laying about them with sticks, and shooting stones from slings. It was not much of a fight. The robbers were poor, simple-minded, hungry men, stupid from starvation, and though the traders were not very good fighters, as we would have counted it in Arzawa, they were well fed, armed, and quick-witted, so they soon drove them off and sent them howling away into the countryside. But before they did so, one of the merchants nearly lost his life. He was a young man who handled his stave fairly well, but one of the robbers got past it and would have cut his throat if I had not seen what was happening. I felt no love for the young merchant, but was not on the side of the robbers, so I came up behind the bandit and struck him a tremendous blow over the head with a stick I had picked up. So the young man's life was saved. The last robber was sent running off to join his fellows, and peace settled down upon us again. It had been a great night for me. I thanked the gods for letting me prove myself worthy of my training at home. I had fought well and saved a life together with much valuable property. Now, if I must be left along the roadside to die, at least I would not die in shame. I fell into a deep, restful sleep. In the morning, before the caravan set out again, a very dirty donkey boy came to me and said his master wanted to see me. It was the first time any of them had spoken to me except in anger, and remembering that I was the son of a Hittite lord, I tried to make myself as clean as possible. I even took the trouble to braid my hair. I ate the last of my food supply to give myself strength, then followed the donkey boy to the man who wanted to see me. It was the young man whose life I had saved. I had noticed him before, for he was one of the magnificent ones who rode in a sedan chair with cushions and carved ivory fittings carried by 4 strong men. I had seen such things before only in Hattusas, and very few of them even there. He was not much older than I, and was as handsome as the Canaanite god Adonai, with white teeth and the beginnings of a young beard. He wore a fine cone-shaped hat, beautifully made sandals, and a robe and tunic bordered in the deep, bright purple that had been worn by the royal family in Hattusas. Besides this, he carried an elegantly carved walking stick. I had tried to hold him in scorn, but could not help admiring him. "You have done a great thing for me," he said, after staring at me for a little while. "Are you a free-born man?" "My father," I said proudly, "was a lord and a kinsman of the chief of the province of Arzawa. And you," I added to myself, "are nothing but a buyer and seller of goods, and your people have never been anything but the slaves of stronger nations." But the young man could not hear what I said to myself. He smiled a wonderfully bright, sweet smile. "In that case," he said, "you are as my brother, for you have saved my life. Have you food for the rest of the journey?" I was ashamed, but told him the truth. "Then you will share mine," said the young man, and to prove that he meant it, he had his servant bring me a skin of goat's milk, from which I drank heartily, and some honey cakes to go with it. Never having met anyone like this magnificent person before, I was silent at first, and waited to see what he would say to me. "My name is Hannibal ben Ethbaal," he said, when I had finished the milk and cakes. "My father is an elder of Tyre." I had heard of Tyre. It was a city on the coast of Canaan, not so big and thriving as Sidon, its neighbor to the north, but a rich, powerful town. Like most of these cities, it was ruled by Egypt, but governed by its own chief, high priest, and council of elders, all chosen from among the great merchant families of the town. Hannibal, it seemed, was making his first trading journey with this caravan to practice the arts of buying and selling his father's goods in a foreign land. "Then this caravan," I said, "is headed for Tyre. Is Harosheth far from Tyre? Harosheth? Hannibal frowned in surprise. What have you to do in Harosheth? I told him of my father's death and the reason for my journey into Canaan. I am sorry for what happened to your father, said Hannibal, though we in Canaan have no reason to love the Hittites. But, he added, you will find little peace or safety in Harosheth. Why not? I asked him. Because it is a hill town, he said, inland in Canaan. They say it is the fiercest and cruelest town of all. They are rough and lawless there in the hills, and the country is full of robbers and rebels. They fight among themselves, and 10 years seldom goes by that one of their cities has not destroyed one of the others. They have not our wealth and trade, you see, so they are not so well protected by Egypt as we are on the coast. I wondered if the inland cities were always at war with one another, how I could be sure that my father's friend was still alive. All the same, I said, I must go to Harosheth. I have given my promise. You must rest in Tyre first, said Hannibal. My father is an honorable man, and he will not let you go without rewarding you for saving my life. Stay close to my supply train, and take what food you need. When we come to Tyre, my servants will guide you to my father's house. The signal was given for the caravan to set out again. Hannibal ben Ethbaal was lifted in his chair on the shoulders of his 4 husky bearers, and I stared after him, bewildered and uncertain. Then I followed after his supplies and his donkey boys. I could not understand this sudden burst of fortune that had come upon me, and could really not believe that any good could come to me, a Hittite, at the hands of a Canaanite trader. But at least I had food now, and knew that I was not going to die on the road to Canaan. And chapter 3 is called The House of Ethbaal. The first word is the. And I think that is where we should end it for today. I hope that you're enjoying the story. It is, I know, a little darker than what we normally read, but this is a barbarous period of time. You'll catch on where this happens in history in a little bit. We already alluded to some of it, the Battle of Kadesh and stuff like that. So I'm going to pause there, just like I said, and we will pick it up next time. Thank you for joining us with Heavy D Storytelling, and we'll be ready to read some more tomorrow or next time. Bye.